name is Jane Morgan. I am a non-executive director here at BlinkLab. I want to thank the East Coast research team as well for putting on this event. There's actually quite a few familiar faces in the room, actually, which is lovely. So thank you all for coming. Just very briefly, and I had this question actually asked to me earlier. I actually run Jane Morgan Management, which is an investor and media relations firm. We've been around for 19 years, and in 19 years, I've been asked to sit on numerous boards. This is the first board I've ever actually accepted, and I'm very pleased to be part of it. I think one of the reasons that I did decide to be on this board is the game-changing technology that we actually have at BlinkLab. Brian will be giving a little bit more in-depth detail, but the diagnostics tool that's able to diagnose autism in young children, I think is one of the key things. I had a lot of girlfriends that do have children who are autistic, and it's been a tough ride for them. It's taken 5 years for them to be diagnosed, and this technology is going to be a game changer. So I'm around if you have any questions, but I will just jump straight into it with Brian. So
thank you, Jane, and thanks everyone. I thought actually the reason why Jane joined the board was because I asked her. So this is an exciting day for me. I always find when the share price is up, I get a little lift in my step. And we definitely have had the share price up. And it's amazing to think that's happened because the lunch has only just begun. And the market opened, 3 hours ago. So you always have a little lift in your step when the share price is up, and you drag your heels a bit when the share price is down. That's just the nature of the beast. But BlinkLab is a really exciting company. And also for me, it's very exciting because I've got this first slide on the screen, and for those who can actually see it, it's actually the team. This is BlinkLab. I'm actually flying to Amsterdam to meet my team and on Saturday, so I'm really excited. And Hank Yarn there, that tall, handsome fellow in the middle, he's the founder, co-founder of the company, and he's a psychiatrist, and he's also done his PhD in psychiatry at Princeton University. So he's Dutch, did his medical degree at Erasmus University, then went to Princeton, did his PhD in psychiatry, and he's the one who came up with this fantastic invention, which is the basis of BlinkLab. And there's the team, and I like this slide, first one, I just put it on there recently because he sent me this picture of this young team that I haven't met yet. So I'm really excited to get on a plane on Saturday and fly over to meet my team. And you can see they're relatively young, and they're all PhDs and inventors, and they've developed this amazing technology which is absolutely disruptive in the world of neurological disorders. And so in my presentation, I hope you form a better understanding about not just neurological disorders in general, particularly in autism and ADHD, but also specifically how BlinkLab is uniquely placed to be able to diagnose autism and or ADHD, because some kids have both, so comorbidities, and be able to diagnose them at a much younger age than is presently possible. And we all know in medicine that the earlier you can diagnose anybody with anything is the better the outcome for the patient. So that's really the basis for which BlinkLab exists. And it's with the generous, and it's not donation, it's the investment by our investment community that has made this company possible. So actually, I'm going to ask a question right now. How many people, if you put your hand up, are actually shareholders of BlinkLab? Wonderful. So about half the room, which is great. That's a great mix. Because, I see the other half as the opportunity to join this family in terms of taking this company through to commercial fruition. Here we go. So it's amazing, the eye. This is what the gateway to all neurological disorders is the eye. You look at the eye and it's amazing what it can tell you. And that's just my first slide. So notice that it's autism and ADHD. Since the company listed about 14 months ago, the whole story has been about autism. But we are now moving into ADHD, and that's because of the massively oversubscribed capital raise that we did, less than a month ago. And that's enabled us to go and pursue ADHD in addition to autism in this US FDA registered clinical studies, which is what you need to do if you want to get commercialized or potentially even acquired. Okay, so that's the pathway that we're on. Now, this slide was only done a few days ago, but you can see what's the share price there, 37 cents. I mean, I think we're 45 cents today. But, the share price will bounce around. I can't control that. But I do know that we're relatively small. We've only got a small market cap. So in terms of where we could potentially be, in terms of where we could be if we actually get regulatory approval and then go into the commercialization or the potential of a takeover target, these numbers are tiny compared to where we could be. And I have had some experience with that because my previous company called ResApp Health, which was also digital healthcare, and that was using signatures and the sound of your cough to diagnose respiratory disease on a smartphone. It was a pretty amazing idea. And that company was acquired by Pfizer Digital in September of 22 for $200 million. And that started with a market cap of only $7 million. So you think about the money that was made by the investors. It's tremendous. So this is really small fry compared to where we want to be. I've got a fantastic board together with Hank in Amsterdam and Anton, the co-founders. He's also based in Perth. This is actually my third company that I've co-founded with Anton. So we're a bit of a pair. And I've actually floated 7 companies now. And this is the rest of the team. Peter, obviously, he's actually Hank's younger brother. He's apparently the genius in the company. I'm looking forward to meeting him personally in Amsterdam next week. Jane, you've met, and also Richard Hopkins. So that makes up the sort of leadership team within the company. And also, we're well funded. We've got over $10 million in the bank, thanks to the massively oversubscribed $7.7 million raise. We actually raised $14 million in bids. And what I'm really pleased to say about that most recent raise is that we had 0 fund managers on the register prior to that. Now we've got all these different investment funds. And largely on the back of a roadshow that Hank and I did in Hong Kong about 6 or 7 weeks ago. And we got all this family office money that started coming on the register as a result of the capital raise that we did. We also picked up a large investment fund out of Switzerland as well. And they've been buying more and more shares in the company. So that might also explain the reason why the share price has been performing so well of late. So we're well funded to achieve what we want to do. So what is autism? I mean, people know that autism is a neurological disorder. It doesn't actually affect that many people. The problem with autism is that parents, when they have a young child and there's something that, parents know when something's not right. And the problem is the enormous cost and burden to our society in being able to diagnose autism. Even though 95 or 98% of the kids turn out to be not autistic. Maybe they're just slow developers. Why is my kid not talking yet? Or why is he or she not crawling yet or walking yet? Or whatever it might be. They tend to catch up, right? There's actually nothing wrong with them. They're maybe just slow developers and they turn out to be perfectly normal. But some turn out to be autistic or perhaps even ADHD. We're seeing a larger incidence of that. And that's really the problem. And we know that the earlier you can diagnose them, the better in terms of being able to treat them. Because you can't treat anybody with anything until they've been diagnosed. And we also know in terms of autism in the USA, I mean, this is a big market. $700 billion, that's only going to go up. We can see that Australia, for some reason, is sitting right at the top of the list. I don't know the reason for that. I mean, I don't think it's in the water. I don't think it's on the food that we eat. It's probably because we have a really sophisticated medical system in Australia and we're just geared up better than many other countries to be able to diagnose. I think that's probably the reason. Others will tell you conspiracy theories, it's in the water or otherwise, fluoride, who knows. I don't subscribe to that. But we do know that this is a big market. So that's really all that slide's supposed to tell you. And we also have, I think, an enormously generous society. I mean, I have to say I am a capitalist. Okay, I've been a capitalist from probably the day I was born, but I like a little bit of socialism as well. It's good. and that we are such a generous society here in Australia that we have the NDIS program that spends so much money looking after those that have disabilities. It's probably the most generous scheme in the world for any country. And I'm quite proud of that. I mean, obviously it's open to a bit of rorting and we've got to stamp that out. But as a general rule, I think it's a wonderful thing that we do. And it's only going up in terms of the amount of expenditure that we're spending on autism, particularly because it's 35% of the national autism budget is spent on children with autism. I mean, that is enormous. It's the biggest expenditure within NDIS. So we can say that we're definitely in a sweet spot. And that number is projected to go over $10 billion in this calendar year. So it's only going up. So this is a good space to be in. If you're going to invest in something in healthcare, I think where BlinkLab is positioned is a good space to be. And as I mentioned earlier, the earlier you can diagnose anybody with anything, the better the outcome, right? So that's really, how is it that kids are currently screened? I mean, they're saying that they want them screened between 18 and 24 months of age. That's not really realistic in the case of most people because there's just not enough psychiatrists. And there's a long wait list to actually go and see a patient and actually have a referral to see a psychiatrist. So the problem is that they're not getting screened early enough. And of course, if they're not screened early enough, then they can't be diagnosed and they can't be treated. And then their behavioural patterns become embedded. And then it becomes really hard to change those behavioural patterns, which are the reasons why autism costs so much in terms of home care living for people with autism. So we want to be able to treat them early. I've just got this slide here because I just want to show you how topical it is. I'm sure you guys all read the newspapers and you know how often the subject of NDIS and autism pops up. So again, we're in a hot space. Now, this is currently how it works. You've got parents who are concerned. They go and see their GP. BlinkLab is all about the GP. I want you to remember I said that because the GP is the gateway to a specialist. And you all know that if you're going to see a specialist for whatever it is that you think that might ail you, you're not going to see that doctor unless you get a referral from your general practitioner. Okay, that's how the system works. It's a good system. The problem is the GPs are not experts in neurological disorders. Okay, so they don't really know how to do something specifically in terms of neurological disorders. And so currently, too many kids get referred is what's happening. This is the reason why the system is breaking down, because there's such a long waiting list to actually see a psychiatrist or a specialist in that space, simply because of the huge wait lists. There's so many kids that are waiting. They end up getting diagnosed late, and that results in late intervention. So where are we coming in? So we have parents concerned again at the start. The GP now has, let's hope, an FDA or a TGA or CE mark approved product that's in a smartphone. It's enormously scalable because everybody's got a smartphone and they can perform this test. Now, they can tell you right now, the GP is not going to do this test unless it's regulatory approved. They're not into Mickey Mouse rubbish, right? This thing has to work. And that's why we're doing the clinical trials that we're doing, so that the GPs will say, all right, the FDA or the TGA has now approved this new product. It's allowing us to screen for autism and or ADHD. Now, that is a wonderful business model, because if you get thousands and thousands of children at a young age who the parents are concerned, they then get screened by the GP, and this says this is indicative of autism or ADHD, and that facilitates the process to going and seeing the specialist. What you end up doing is a screening test that rules out the children that are clearly not indicative of having a disorder. I don't really mind if we rule out 95 or 98% of children, because we'll get paid for every single test. So that's millions and millions of tests potentially around the world for all young children, and the test is relatively inexpensive. So this is how we'll generate enormous sums of money. And it only happen if we get regulatory approval, and that can only happen if we do our clinical trials right, which is what we're doing, and I'll get into the clinical trials shortly. This is just a short video, just shows you what's involved in this test. It's pretty simple. It actually works on the facial reflex. So I'm going to describe this to you now. Imagine that we're all in this room as we are now, relatively quiet, listening to me, and then we're interrupted by the fire alarm. What's going to happen is, and I'm certain that at 100% of the people here, I'm sure you're all neurotypical. So no one here has autism or ADHD, I'm pretty confident. But if that happens and the fire alarm goes off, what will happen is that every single one of you will blink. That's called the facial reflex. It's just like the knee reflex. If I whack you on the knee, your leg's going to do that. So the facial reflex works the similar way. If you're startled by that loud noise, you're going to blink. Now, by the second beep in that series of beeps that comes with the fire alarm, half of you will blink and the other half won't. But by the third beep, I would suspect none of you will be blinking, right? Your brain is neurotypical. But what's happening with an autistic ADHD child is that if you introduce a second beep, microseconds or milliseconds separated. So it sounds like one beep, but it's actually two. Okay, so they're only 30 or 40 milliseconds apart. What happens is, and this is scientific research going back 50 years, so we didn't invent this, is that the neurotypical person, when stunned by that double beep that sounds like one, and I don't really know why this happens, but the neurotypical person does not blink. But the ADHD autistic person does. And so that was the idea that Hank had. Why don't I put that knowledge into a smartphone? I can provide all the stimulus, just like you've seen with that child. The child could look at the screen. They can provide the visual and audio stimuli, and then throw in the odd double beep. See what happens, and use the forward-facing camera to analyze your face. And that is the key to BlinkLab, all patented through Princeton University, unique, as a digital biomarker in what is currently a subjective testing, which means that the psychiatrist looks at you, assesses you, gives you a score, adds up the score, and that's how they do subjective neurological testing. It is the standard of care. There is no digital biomarker available today. BlinkLab will be the first. And this is a disruptive technology using only a smartphone. Now, I'm going to show this in a little more detail here. So this child is neurotypical. He's 4 years old, and he's going to be given the single beep. Now, if you might hear a beep, let's see what happens and watch his eyes. So there's a beep and his eyes moved. And you can see that eye closure there on that chart. So this is neurotypical behavior. There's nothing special about this whatsoever. Now we're going to take the same child, but we're going to give him that double beep stimulus that I talked about. So it actually sounds like one beep, but it's actually two. Now, if you listen carefully, you'll hear the two beeps, but that's only because it's been slowed right down. And you can see it on this chart. So, did you hear that double beep? So, did you notice that he did not blink? Let's try that again.
No.
There's no blink. Okay? Now, I can't explain to you, I'm not a scientist, why that is a fact, but that is the case. And that's been documented in scientific research going back 50 odd years. Now, let's go and take an autistic child. So this is a typical autistic child. He's 2 years old. Now, let's give him the single beat. And there's a blink. All right, try that again. You can see the blink. And the blink is measured there. Now let's give him the double beat. Blinks anyway. That is a typical behavior for an autistic and or an ADHD person. And by the way, this is not just on children. It doesn't matter how old you are. We've got well over 2,000 patients in the clinical trials that we did to develop this technology. And the people aged between 2 years and I think it was 94 years old. And the behavior is exactly the same. I'm focused on young children because I think that's where the biggest commercial opportunity lies. So that's why we're doing that. So just to explain it, what we're doing here is you can see that the phone, using that forward-facing camera, is looking at all aspects of the face. And the way I've explained it is pretty simple. It's really more than just that beep. There's lots of other visual stimuli that the phone is providing as well. I've just explained it in a way probably that I can understand, maybe that you can understand. There's a lot more science to it than that, but that's generally the principle of it. So we're looking at different minuscule things, but effectively it is a biomarker. And a biomarker is something like a PSA blood test for prostate cancer. If you get a higher level of PSA in your blood, that's indicative of having prostate cancer. That is an objective test. Medicine loves objective tests. Unfortunately, in neurological disorders, it's all about subjective testing. And so that's what we're introducing, a digital biomarker, an objective test in a field that we have to compare ourselves to a subjective test. Okay? Now, this is the most important slide in my presentation because this tells you the evidence of whether this thing really works or not. And for those really astute amongst you, and I will ask this question, so here we have sensitivity and specificity. 91% for sensitivity, 85% for specificity. This is a double-blind trial on some, 430-odd patients, where we don't know whether the person presented to us is autistic or not. We have no idea. We're just giving that test, and then we're comparing our digital result to a psychiatric result. And by the way, the psychiatric result is always right. It's not always right, I can tell you, right? It's subjective, but it's as good as it can be. It's pretty accurate. So you can never get 100% accuracy. Anyone who claims 100% accuracy is lying, because you can never be 100% compared to something that's not 100% accurate, right? But those results are fantastic. But when we floated the company, does anyone remember what the actual stats were in the first presentation in the prospectus? No? It was actually 86 and 85%. So effectively, since we floated the company and we did more testing, those results have only got better. Now we're at 91 and 85. And that was really the first big jump in the share price, was after we put out those results. Okay? So that's where we're now at. I want to show you some competition. Now, it is competition, whether you really call it competition, I'm not sure. But what we have here is Cognoa and ETD. Now, they're two US private companies. Okay, so I can't tell you what their market cap is, I don't know. I know that both of them raised in excess of $400 million in the US to do what we're doing. But they're not the same. So let me talk about Cognoa first. So anyone here can tell me what a de novo is? What is that? Thank you, Michael. A first in class. So this is a really important thing to remember if you're going to invest in a company like BlinkLab. The thing that I look for is it even approvable? Does the FDA, are they going to accept this? Remember, we're dealing with scientists and medical doctors. How do you think they feel about a smartphone doing perhaps even better than they can do after their years of medical practice and education? The answer is there's some resistance. Okay, so what I like about the Cognoa thing is that they're de novo, which means a first in class. It means, in essence, it's approvable. So they're using a smartphone to collect information about a patient to then allow a doctor remotely to diagnose you. Okay, that's effectively what it is. It's a first in class. It shows that it's approvable. But by the way, it's not very good. 52% and 19% is pretty bad. I wouldn't even argue that it even works at all, really. But they did get approval, which then paved the road for something better. That's what a de novo is. Something better did come along. It's called ETD. ETD, also US-based, achieved 71 and 81%, and they got what's called a 510K. A 510K is an approval by the FDA based on a predicate. which is the de novo. So they got approved, but they've got a big problem. They don't use a smartphone at all. They're actually using high-speed cameras set up in a hospital room where they've trained on your face. Yes, they're providing similar stimuli that we are, but it's not being done on a smartphone and it's not scalable. What are they going to do? Roll that out in every hospital around the world? Imagine the enormous cost of doing that. Now, I couldn't tell you what their share price is because they're private, so that's not disclosed. But I do know that we're doing more like what ETD is doing, but on a smartphone. And it's all licensed exclusively from Princeton University. There's an enormous amount of intellectual property behind it. And this is where we're up to. And with results far, far better than the only two known competitors. So that is where we're at with BlinkLab. In terms of the clinical trial, I'm getting to the end of my presentation, by the way. Everything in yellow is already achieved. So we're actually ahead of schedule in terms of where we said we would be. We've already commenced our US autism study. We've already got 3 hospitals signed up. There'll probably be another 5 or 6 US-based hospitals. It's important that we get geographical spread. We want to get a full racial spread of US citizens, be it Caucasian or African-American, Latino, doesn't matter. The FDA wants to know that this product will work on anybody. Okay, we believe it will, but we have to demonstrate that by having hospitals in different communities to get that full racial spread. We're doing that. We're already well ahead in terms of recruitment, and now that we've got that, then now we're actually moving into more studies that we're going to do. I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but also that we've got more news. So there is some more news coming out, I believe, in coming days or weeks in respect to some studies that we're doing in Europe so we can get CE mark approval for ADHD. I like ADHD. It's a market that's many times bigger than autism. In fact, let me talk about that. This is actually my favorite slide. Okay, so have a look at this slide. Remember I told you all about the beep and the double beep? So you haven't got any audio demonstration, but I think this chart actually really shows you. So what you can see here is this is a neurotypical control, and you've got the first sound followed by the second sound. The same thing in these charts here. Now, what does anyone observant here tell me about the difference in these charts between autism and ADHD? Can anyone tell me? What's it telling you? Sorry?
The ADHD child blinks on the second.
Yes.
Whereas the autism is sort of delayed.
Well, actually, you're the other way around, but you're on the right idea. It's the ADHD child blinks more to the first beep, and the autistic child blinks more to the second beep. See how the reaction? See, autism is more after the second, whereas ADHD is more to the first. Now, that difference is about 30 milliseconds. Not much. But the smartphone is able to capture that and analyze that. So what I'm telling you is that our product is already developed for ADHD. It's the same product. It's just realizing the difference between autism reaction and an ADHD reaction. Now, when you've got a product like that, what you're dealing with is something like a Ozempic. Right? Ozempic was originally approved for diabetes, and then it got approved for weight loss. It's the same drug, right? And then they found even a bigger commercial market. I mean, diabetes was already a massive market for Ozempic. We've got the same product that's already working in autism, but it also works for ADHD, right? So that is what we are now doing. So that money that we recently raised, that's $7.7 million, we're already funded for the autism trial. We're going to go and do a huge US ADHD regulatory study starting very soon with the money that we've just raised so we can run the 2 trials concurrently. And that means we double the amount of news flow. And I like ADHD because the market is 5 or 6 times bigger than the autism market. So that study will start very soon, like in the coming next month or so. So that is a very important one. And thank you to the investors who supported us for that last raise, because that has made that ADHD possible in terms of that trial. Just to finish off, these are some of the key leaders, and Hank and Anton, Baz and Peter. I'll be seeing these guys from Holland next week. I'm looking forward to that. The money that we've raised is supporting their work so that we can continue to deliver the news flow that we're doing. And also to my board, Jane you've met, Richard you haven't, but he's also in Perth. We've got a great scientific advisory board as well. And in terms of just the highlights, we're really unique. We've got a breakthrough technology. We've got a massive market opportunity. We're doing it the right way. I guess, and to close, we're really gearing this up to be of interest to the big pharmas of the world, to the big tech companies of the world. They're very interested in the digital diagnostic space, particularly when it involves smartphone applications. My last company proved that you can be acquired by a big pharma or a big tech for a great deal of money to delivering great returns for shareholders. I think that BlinkLab has got a much, much bigger market opportunity. So with that, I thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming. I'm going to answer some questions. And I also wanted to do a little shout out to my wife and son over there. Sorry, there's Zach. Zach's just he's doing first year commerce at UWA in Perth. He's always been wondering what Dad does for a living. So son, there you go. This is what I do. Thank you very much.
Yes.
How do you protect your intellectual property on a thing like this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I did my last company, and I've done 7 now, but ResAb Health was a terrific one. I licensed that tech from the University of Queensland. It used signatures and the sound of a cough to diagnose respiratory disease on a smartphone. It was ultimately acquired by Pfizer for $200 million in September 22. When Pfizer came to us with a non-disclosure agreement so they could look at this thing, the first thing they looked at was all the IP. And I think that R&D stands for, at least when I did my MBA many years ago, it stood for research and development. It's actually replicate and duplicate. All right? That's what they did. They were looking at how can we get around this? But they realised that because University of Queensland developed the IP, which is what we exclusively licensed, there was no way around it. Universities are really good. Now, I'm making a value judgment statement here, but I think that Princeton University is next level when it comes to IP. So I'm pretty confident that if there was any interest in terms of acquiring or licensing the technology from big pharma or big tech, they'd have to get around Princeton's patents, and I don't like their chances.
It's always a team in Hull.
They're actually just I think it's Delft. I haven't been there before. I've been to Amsterdam before, but yes, they're in a town about an hour south of Amsterdam.
Why are they here?
Well, because the technology, the inventors were actually from Amsterdam or from Holland. So they did that. They did then he developed the technology while he was doing his professorship at Princeton University. And then that opportunity came to Anton and myself and Michael, and we then floated this company. Sorry, yeah?
It's just how much is it going to cost the GPs to get it on their smartphone?
Yeah.
Because, the GPs now are complaining they're not being paid enough by Medicare,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. This is going something else for them to put on their phones. It will be an added cost to clients. Or does someone get here?
Look, I don't have a...
Will repeat the question.
Yes, so she's asking about the cost to the GPs to use the tech. So the answer to that is, if you get regulatory approval, then you can then join, potentially, you have to apply, but you can be part of the Medicare rebate scheme. So then the cost is reduced. But, and this is an important point that you raised that I didn't mention, which I should have, and that is, if you want a product like this approved by the regulatory bodies, be it the FDA in the US or TGA in Australia or CE in Europe, you have to keep the doctor in the loop. In other words, if this was a home diagnostic tool that you would say, oh, I'd love to download this from the App Store and use it on my child, you're not going to be able to do that because the FDA will never approve it. They hate Dr. Google. They hate us. They don't want you going and researching and finding out what's wrong with you. They want the doctor to be empowered. So this will be a tool to assist a doctor to make the diagnosis.
So just partly of that. Of course, a lot of these things would be, and if we're talking Andreas Weber, unless someone is diagnosed of ADHD or autism, maybe they're not going to be able to get the rebate until they're diagnosed?
Yeah, nothing starts... Absolutely. You must be diagnosed first before you can be treated.
Test would not be debatable because they haven't been diagnosed.
No. The tests are often most likely rebatable, provided they're regulatory approved. Okay, so that's why we're doing spending the money on the clinical trials, because we want regulatory approval.
Brian, you mentioned the addressable market in the US is about 700 billion.
The autism market as a whole, yes.
Yeah, where does Europe sit with that, and what is the global sort of estimate?
Okay, so I don't know the answer, but I do know this much. Generally speaking, when you talk about drug markets, they say that the EU market is comparable in size to the US market. So I'd be guessing it's about 700 billion as well.
So that would be the next sort of stop down the road.
Well, it depends, because we do have results coming out for our ADHD European study, which is about 400 plus or 500 plus children. So if those results come out really good, then we'll be applying for CE mark approval before we even get to FDA submission.
And is that a lesser of a hurdle? It was the FDA.
No. That would be a misnomer. They are all hard. You know, FDA, Australian TGA, CE, they're all hard. But there is an interesting point, and you know, we're living in the Trumpian world, and there's one thing about Donald that I do agree with, and that is if you want to go into the most lucrative commercial market in the world, being the United States, you need to spend some money there first. So he ain't going to let you do clinical trials in Europe or Australia and then go and get hopefully fabulous results and then apply for FDA approval over there. That's not going to happen. You're going to have to do clinical trials in the US as well. Not because Americans are different to us, it's just simply because you have to spend money in the US if you want to get approval in the US. And that's a model that I agree with. So, and we're doing that. So just because you get approved in Europe or Australia does not mean you'll get approval in the US. You have to do your trials there, and we're already doing that. Yes.
Analyst was subscriber to Morningstar's analysis of new shares at shares that talk about moats. So would you say around your company there's a narrow moat or a wide?
I'm not familiar with moats.
Moats are if you have something unique. So it's about how far in the future your patents end up being protected.
Well, the patents are typically 25 years. And so I think we've got at least 20 years left on our patents. And then you also get an additional protection, because if you get regulatory approval, say in the US, then they give you additional patent protection over and above that. So yeah, I'm very happy on the patent side, because I would love this company to be the target of an acquisition at some point. I certainly would. That would be a fantastic outcome. But we're gearing it that way. I mean, for example, it's no secret that all the studies that we're doing are done exclusively on Apple smartphones. Right? That is purposeful. Yes.
I think your sort of specificity is 85%. Have tests been redone on the 15% you are negative? They'll be currently silent over the meeting.
Well, I think the sensitivity is when we say when you say you've got autism and you do have autism, versus specificity is if we say you don't have autism and then you don't. It's a statistical anomaly, and I'm not a scientist or mathematician, but you want something that's more sensitive, is more ability to actually say if you've got something, you actually do have it. Right, so from a medical point of view, they're most focused on sensitivity.
That's specific, is it?
No, but specific is not perfect. Correct. So in terms of this, and I mentioned this at the start of my prezzo, I am comparing our result to something that is subjective. So if I've got a psychiatrist addressing a young child and say this person says they're autistic, they probably would agree that the child is autistic. But there's also a spectrum there too. So they might differ as to where that child might sit on the spectrum. Now, our technology, based on the reaction time, can also predict where they sit on the spectrum as well. But I can't be 100% accurate, because the gold standard that we have to compare ourselves to is not exactly gold. It's probably more silver.
It's like, have people had negative patients in retest?
Yes.
And same result? Or
Well, no, I couldn't.
additional?
I don't have that statistical data to back it up. But yes, that is all part of the assessment from the FDA and the studies that we're doing. So they will definitely. Oh, gosh. Should have turned that off. Yes.
Thanks for that excellent presentation and where you've got come to do so far. But can you just, what sort of cash flow is envisaged if the GP is going to pull out his smartphone and do this test? Because they won't, unfortunately, all they want to do is get you out of the room with a script. Thank God.
Yep.
Unless there's a reward.
Well, they get rewarded for referrals. So they understand that there is a system in place where GPs make referrals to specialists. But in terms of the way this would likely be done, is the parent would have the app and do the test at home and then send the results to the GP.
Who pays? What's the cash flow?
Well, the paying model would be likely for reimbursement, but the cost of do you know how much it costs to go through a process to get an autism diagnosis? It's somewhere in the order of about $5,000 to $10,000.
How long does it take?
And it takes many, many months, right? So it's an expensive process to get formally diagnosed. Now, we're not going to change that. I don't see the psychiatrists saying, oh, well, you've been diagnosed on the BlinkLab app, so yeah, you must be autistic and we'll start treating you. I don't see that. I'd love to see that happen, but I don't see that as a realistic thing. What I see it as more of a triage or a screening test where it's used on anyone that might be suspect and then be able to rule people in or out. And most of the time they'll be ruled out. I don't care. If the cost was $30 or $40 and it's been used millions of times, that would be a fantastic outcome for BlinkLab. So that's the purpose.
Who is?
Well, the user pays, right, ultimately, but, well, the user is the parent. The parent will pay, but will it be subsidised is the question. And I would hope it would be subsidised. Once it's got regulatory approval, you can apply for reimbursement. So, yes?
What's the minimum age of a patient?
2 years old.
Sure.
That's now, by the way, it could be younger potentially, but I don't have any patients under 2 years old to make a determination. Yes?
Well, it's also good to mention that traditionally when you go for a diagnosis of ADHD or autism, you need multiple different opinions from different psychiatrists. So I think if you have that set plan in, then you won't need as much follow through. Would that be fair to say?
I don't know that it's multiple psychiatrists that are making the assessment.
So there's the single one, then a second opinion, sometimes third opinion's needed.
Yeah, but sometimes a parent might be that you don't have autism. The parent says, I don't agree with you. I'm going to get another opinion.
Exactly, that's what.
Yes, well, that could happen. But remember, how do you get that opinion in the first place? You need a referral, right? I actually think, my father's a doctor. He's a retired obstetrician gynecologist. He thought this is a fantastic idea. But he doesn't think that the psychiatrist is going to use this as the be-all and end-all. It's going to be, well, thanks very much. I'm glad that you're seeing me, but I'll make my own assessment, thank you very much. But at least this will facilitate that. Yes?
Do you see the government having a role is because ultimately they would want the best outcome? Sure.
Yeah.
They would hold them right.
Well, it comes down to the NDIS and how much enormous money we're spending on this particular subsection, which is autism. So I would ask you, how much of that $7 or $8 billion, I think it was, that we're spending just on autism, how much of that's being wasted?
That's
right? It's an enormous amount of waste going through the diagnosis.
See if I'm in a Pandora's box.
Right. So, you know, I'd love to have the Minister for Health one day and get his or her attention into this, because this is something that can save economies huge amounts of money, because it's effectively screening kids independently before, like a triage, before they see the psychiatrist, before the big bucks start rolling in, right, for the doctors. They get to screen them to rule them in or out. Right, and that's the purpose here. Now, by the way, if it ends up being that every kid that we screened and 95% were turned out to be fine and we ruled them out, but the 5% that turned out to have an issue, and then those of that 5%, 90% of them ended up having autism or ADHD. Now, that'll only happen through practice. Imagine what would happen then. You might actually end up with a new platform technology that becomes the gold standard, right? But that's not going to happen yet. That can only happen once it's been regulatory approved and commercialized.
There's another thing, like a lot of schools prior to a child dying in kindergarten will have to have ears tested, eyes tested.
Yes.
What are you talking?
As part of the standard assessment, you see? This becomes another tool, just like a stethoscope for a doctor. It's another piece of cool tool in their kitty. Yes.
I think the final question before lunch. I'm a parent with a child on the spectrum, right? And I've gone through the diagnosis process. From what I understand, there's many different traits and characteristics between boys and girls as how they react. How does BlinkLab, is there a difference with like boy diagnosis compared to girl?
No, I'm glad you raised that. I wasn't going to get all that deep and meaningful, but you do raise an important subject because girls apparently are very good at hiding their symptoms, so they end up being diagnosed even later. The physical reaction to the stimulus is indifferent between boys and girls. The problem is we still have to demonstrate it by comparison to the actual psychiatrist evaluation. So it just means that we diagnose more boys than girls, but the girls, we have to be validated by the psychiatric evaluation of the girl, which can take longer, right? But there is no physiological difference in terms of how they facial reflex reacts between boys and girls or their ages. Makes no difference.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, well, I'm going to be hanging around and I want to say thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over to Jane and we're going to hear from an analyst who's going to give you his independent views on BlinkZone.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, everyone. And look, I know that it is quite late in the day, but there is food coming and you will be well fed. But thank you all for joining us today. I'm very appreciative. I hope you've learned a little bit here. And of course, Brian and I will still be around today if you want to have a chat and get some further insights. I want to thank again the team at East Coast Research for joining us today. A lot of you will have seen actually Raoul Schwer's note that he did write about BlinkLab. I think we're the past time, I think we're almost there, if not we've surpassed it. But we'd love to just get your thoughts, perhaps on why you like the story, what you think the news flow catalyst might be, and you know what's to look forward to.
Thank you. It's hard to really add much more value than Brian you has already done, but I'll try to keep it concise. Look, at East Coast, we really, really have liked this stock a lot. Our price target for the stock was $1.74 actually. When I covered the stock and I released the report in early February of this year, the stock price was 26 cents. So it's basically already gone up over 50% in the last few months, which we're very happy about. But more importantly, I think, this year, as Brian alluded to, there's a strong pipeline of positive news flow, particularly in relation to the autism FDA trial already commencing, first patients being already tested, and there'll be subsequently results coming out in the next few months. Not final results, but interim results, which will be another catalyst for the stock. And apart from that, there's also news about the company's partnering and collaboration works with strong partners to further fine-tune its ADHD offering. It's already quite, the autism offering is already quite well developed, and just a little bit behind that is the ADHD offering. So there needs to be, the company's doing well in terms of partnering with other research partners to help it in its journey. So why do we like the stock so much? Just a few reasons. Brian's already covered most of them. Obviously, incredibly strong management. I mean, this is a company which is basically formed by Tier 1 academics from the best universities in the world, in the Netherlands, Erasmus, Princeton University academics. So, they know what they're doing, basically. And apart from the academic side, and mind you, these are experts in AI, neuroscience, software development, all key things required to run a company such as BlinkLab. We also have a strong commercial acumen with Brian, Anton, and Jane also as part of the board. As Brian mentioned, he's already had a number of successful healthcare exits. These things matter. It decreases investment risk if the company is being run by operators who are well experienced. But I think for me, when I look at this stock, when I was looking at it originally, like the thing that really stood out to me was prior to the company being listed on the stock exchange in 2024, it had spent more than a decade already, probably about, I think, 15, 16 years. These guys started developing the early stages of the technology back in 2007. They've already succeeded prior to even listing, and they've already gone through seed capital rounds of raising, pre-IPO capital rounds of raising. They'd already achieved and accomplished a number of successful results across a number of clinical trials. That matters because it reduces downside risk for people like us who are new investors to the stock. I come across a lot of investment proposals on a daily basis for software and tech plays. And these guys, a lot of them are still early on, but they're listed, but they're early on in their investment journey. So these guys are going to keep on incurring cash expenditures and costs in order to spend on R&D to fine-tune their product. BlinkLab has more or less already done that. Similarly, with miners, a lot of junior miners, we all know they have to raise capital to fund these drilling programs in the hope of striking something large and increasing their resource estimate. BlinkLab, in comparison, is much better placed. It already has an offering which is proven with science to be more accurate in its diagnosis than its two key leading competitors in the US do already have FDA approval. So, on the key risk of FDA approval, if you're already achieving such strong results across robust clinical trials, which are large trials and have higher rates of accuracy than two players in the US who already have FDA approval, chances are you'll probably get FDA approval. So, and actually my valuation takes into account the risk of not receiving FDA approval. I lower the revenue streams by adding a risk factor, and that $1.74 is actually a conservative valuation. If I'd assumed that they would get FDA approval with 100% guarantee, the stock price's valuation would have been higher than that. So what else I'd like to add? I think these days AI is a big buzzword. A lot of companies want to be in the AI space. They want to solve problems. Some do, and many don't. And we all know, as Brian talked about in the data, this company's diagnostic app, smartphone app, has proven its ability to more early on and more accurately diagnose these key neurodevelopment disorders in children. And consequently, there will be a plethora of positive healthcare and economic outcomes that flows through to patients, their families, and the wider healthcare system. So the technology is solving a real-world problem, and solving it quite well and better than its competitors. Lastly, I'd like to just say, look, there's a very unique thing about the business model where it has a virtuous cycle, right? So if you're good, you ultimately in time you become even better and even better. So what happens is, because BlinkLab's diagnostic accuracy results are clearly better than Cognola's and ETD, and also it's also more amenable to a scale-up compared to ETD, which relies on hardware. I mean, this technology can be conducted. You can get a diagnosis in just 30 minutes using a smartphone app. So, as a result, what will happen is more patients and more healthcare professionals in the US will be likely to recommend and use the product, the software. So BlinkLab will have access to larger and larger sources of biomarker data, which then in turn it will use to further perfect its AI diagnostic model, which then again back to this virtuous cycle. Its predictive accuracy for these disorders will improve even more. So, and we've seen this in practice with BlinkLab actually achieving better diagnostic results sequentially, chronologically in time. The other key benefit that this allows BlinkLab to do is, like Brian alluded to, it allows BlinkLab to monetize its offering into other adjacent areas. the more this biomarker data, biomarker data that it has is very, very valuable, extremely valuable. And BlinkLab has ownership of this data, and in time it can monetize it by, catering into the dementia market, the schizophrenia market, the Alzheimer's market. So the market opportunity as BlinkLab succeeds will only continue to grow. So these kind of businesses in the tech space are called, platform businesses with network economics. Uber, for example, the more drivers you have, the more passengers you get. The more passengers you get, the more drivers you have, and the cycle goes on and on. So BlinkLab has these traits. Now, just very briefly, and I'll wrap it up. It's like the valuation of $1.74. I included a lot of, I would say, conservative factors. I assumed prices for the product, which are not only less than BlinkLab's planned pricing model, but they're materially less than the actual similar, actual companies in the US right now who are offering similar value proposition to BlinkLab, materially less. So that is one factor to assure us in terms of the valuation. I completely ignored the European market opportunity in the valuation. That was completely omitted, even though in time, BlinkLab can enter the market. And as Brian talked about, this is a market which could be at least as big as the US. I delayed the ramp-up period for both products by a year compared to current expectations. So, I delayed the cash flow generation, and we still have the $1.74 valuation.
What's your new price target, Raul?
Well, I mean, the new price target, as you keep on, when we do the update note, it will probably, be even higher than, or if you get bought out, it could be even, so, but in terms of, there was a lot of kind of thought and deliberate kind of downside assumptions that went into the valuation. For a company, and this is my last point, and then we'll wrap it up. For a company that is provably the leading diagnostic tool, right? I assumed only a 10% market share grab in the US, and I assumed a 3-year ramp-up period for that. So these are all very reasonable assumptions that are underpinning the valuation that we have. And so far, so good. The stock's doing really well, and we are confident that it will continue to do well as well. Thank you.
Well,